On 19th August, Chinese Foreign Minister and Special Representative to India-China boundary question, Wang concluded his meetings with India's NSA Ajit Doval and met Prime Minister Modi in New Delhi. A day later, on August 20th, Chinese President Xi Jinping's arrival in Lhasa, capital of Tibet, made the news. He was accompanied by senior officials Wang, Huning and Kai Ki. The same day, India's Strategic Force Command test fires Agni 5 intermediate range ballistic missile from Chandipur in Odisha. On 21st August, Xi Jinping participated in grand celebration on the occasion of 60th anniversary of founding of Xizang or Tibet Autonomous Region, founded in 1965. But this time, during his second visit to Lhasa, Xi Jinping did not stop over in Nyingchi, unlike the last visit. Nyingchi is a highly militarized zone, is very near to disputed Arunachal border. Xi Jinping's first visit in July 2021, soon after Galwan Valley clash, was a strategic message to India. China had built civil-military dual-use infrastructure on a massive scale at Nyingchi. Now, around a week later, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting China's Tianjin to participate in SCO Summit 2025 on 31st August and 1st September. India has long recognized Tibet as part of China, but past follies have led to unresolved disputed boundary between both the countries. What may unfold in next few days should be viewed through the lens of history so we get a clear picture. Stay tuned till end of the video, and if you have yet not subscribed our channel, please you can do so if you are interested in such stories. So without further ado, let's get started. After the Galwan Valley incident that led to the martyrdom of 20 Indian Army bravehearts, both India and China signed a border patrol agreement in October 2024. After 34 WMCC meetings and 24 rounds of special representative talks, all eyes are fixed on upcoming meeting of Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping in Tianjin. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar emphasized on de-escalation at the border in meeting with his Chinese counterpart. Both leaders expressed satisfaction over peace and tranquility that now persists at LAC following disengagement. India also clarified its stand on one China policy vis-a-vis to Taiwan or the Republic of China. But what does the developments mean next to India and Tibetans? So let's first brush up some lessons from the history. Tibet functioned as a de facto independent state post 1912 when the Qing dynasty collapsed. Tibet had its own government, currency, army, and conducted foreign relations, though few countries formally recognized its independence. China's founder, Mao Zedong, soon after establishment of People's Republic of China in 1949, declared that Tibet was part of China and must be liberated. Following his orders, on 6th October 1950, the People's Liberation Army launched the Battle of Chamdo in eastern Tibet. Tibetan forces, fragmented and equipped with traditional weapons, who numbered hardly 8,000 to 10,000, resisted PLA troops' massive assault across the upper Yangtze River. However, after about 2 weeks of fighting, Chamdo fell on 19th October 1950, and the Tibetan Governor General Nangpo Nwangpo Jigme surrendered. The 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, was just 15 years old at that time. So because of his young age, political power was exercised by Regent Tatra Rinpoche. The Tibetan cabinet, Kashag, decided that Dalai Lama should flee to India. He was actually moved briefly towards Yatong near the India-Bhutan border for safety. But on advice from both his officials and India's representative in Lhasa, Sumal Sinha, Dalai Lama returned to Lhasa to maintain authority. India, despite his political officer in Lhasa, did not intervene directly. After the one-sided Battle of Chamdo, PRC halted its advance and pressured Tibetan government to negotiate. Tibet sent a 5-member delegation to Beijing in 1951 under Governor General Nangpo Ugjigme, who was not jailed but strangely treated respectfully. But under extreme duress, the delegation had no freedom to negotiate independently. The delegation, without the consent of Dalai Lama or Kashag, was forced to sign the 17-point agreement for the peaceful liberation of Tibet. With this, Chinese officials and PLA troops entered Lhasa and set up parallel authority. In the beginning, Beijing tried a united front strategy, working with Tibetan elites and promising autonomy. But gradually, China increased political, military, and economic control. Land reforms, suppression of religion, and interference in local governance triggered growing resentment among Tibetans. In Kham and Amdo of eastern Tibet, resistance by local Tibetans and monks was fierce. From 1956 onwards, the PLA began attacking monasteries in Kham, Amdo, suspected of sheltering rebels. Many monasteries were bombarded, monks arrested, and religious activities curtailed. Then came the great, mysterious, and dramatic escape of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama in March 1959. News broke that the Chinese PLA planned to abduct or even kill the 14th Dalai Lama. The PLA cracked down brutally, shelling the Norbulinka Palace and other Tibetan positions. Dalai Lama's escape was orchestrated by Tibetan officials and resistance fighters, especially members of the Chushi Gandruk Resistance Army. Dalai Lama, 23 at that point of time, started his journey on 17 March 1959 in the disguise of a PLA soldier. Thousands of his followers joined midway. The CIA was already running covert operation in Tibet since mid-1950s, training Tibetan guerrillas in Colorado and parachuting them back into Tibet. CIA did provide intelligence support. They had trained Tibetan guerrillas who helped guide and protect escape routes for 2 weeks long journey. The CIA also set up radio communication with the Dalai Lama's entourage to track his progress. The Dalai Lama crossed India at Khenzimane in Arunachal Pradesh, the then Northeast Frontier Agency, on 31st March 1959. Indian border guards received him, and Prime Minister Nehru soon announced asylum to Dalai Lama and his followers. The PLA knew he had left but failed to intercept. But due to Tibet's rugged terrain made the pursuit difficult, and partly because local Tibetan resistance forces shielded him. China later accused the CIA and India of smuggling the Dalai Lama. However, no evidence of direct Indian involvement emerged in planning the escape. Dalai Lama, who for years have asked for independence of Tibet, of late changed his stance to the autonomy of Tibet. Under China's control, the United States and other Western countries did not militarily intervene to stop China. Washington's main focus at that point of time was the Korean War that happened between 1950 to 1953 and containing communism in East Asia. Tibet was considered remote and the US did not recognize it as an independent state in official policy. The United States acknowledged Chinese sovereignty, though sometimes ambiguously. After the 1959 uprising in Lhasa and the Dalai Lama's flight to India, the CIA helped establish Tibet resistance in Mustang in Nepal. By the early 1970s, as President Nixon and Henry Kissinger sought rapport with China to subdue Chinese communism in the Cold War, the US abruptly ended support for the Tibetan resistance. Many Tibetans felt abandoned. Washington had used Tibet mainly as a Cold War tool to harass China. Instead, it gradually shifted to recognizing Tibet as part of China, especially after establishing formal diplomatic relations with Beijing in 1979. Now coming to India's historical position on Tibet. So pre-1950, Tibet acted as a buffer between India and China. British India had treaties with Tibet and some recognition of its autonomy, though China always claimed sovereignty. After 1947, independent India inherited this ambiguous situation. When Chinese PLA marched into Tibet in 1950, India's response was cautious. India's boundary with China is divided in 3 sectors. The western sector includes Ladakh and Aksai Chin with 1597 kilometer boundary, whereas eastern sector includes Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim with 1346 kilometer boundary. The middle sector with 545 km is least disputed in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. In the 19th century, the British government proposed different boundary lines: Johnson Line, McCartney-MacDonald Line. Aksai Chin, a high-altitude desert, was also left ambiguously marked, and British maps kept changing. Tibet and China had no effective control there. Locals had grazing rights otherwise. In 1914, during the Simla Conference, the British, Tibet and China discussed boundaries. British India and Tibet signed the McMahon Line, placing Arunachal Pradesh, the then Northeast Frontier Agency (NEFA), within India. China's representative initiated the draft but later rejected it, saying Tibet had no authority to sign treaties independently. This is the basis of today's Arunachal Pradesh dispute. While it is clear that Chinese took control of Tibet only in 1950s. When India became independent, it inherited the British maps showing the McMahon Line and Aksai Chin as Indian territory. But when China invaded Tibet in 1950, Tibet's role as a buffer state collapsed, and India now directly faced China across the Himalayas. Friction started erupting between India and China since 1950s. India protested China's entry into Tibet but avoided any confrontation. In 1954, the Panchsheel Agreement was signed between India and China, in which India formally recognized Tibet as part of China. However, the border was not demarcated in that agreement, leaving the issue unresolved. India protested diplomatically but did not intervene militarily. The then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru believed in Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai and wanted to maintain peace. In 1954, PM Nehru signed Panchsheel Agreement with China. Many call the Panchsheel Agreement India's biggest strategic blunder that led to loss of bargaining power on Tibet. No border settlement, leaving McMahon Line in east and Aksai Chin in west discussed. The disputed the Hindi Chini narrative celebrated by Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai and PM Nehru as model for Asia proved a strategic blind spot for India in 1962 war, as India left unprepared, while Chinese PLA was fully prepared militarily. By Panchsheel Agreement, India effectively recognized Chinese sovereignty over Tibet, giving up the older British era special privileges. Tibetans often see this as a turning point. India's formal acceptance weakened Tibet's international standing. The then government's policies resulted in the form of thousands of Tibetans living in India as refugees, and the latest generations also allowed to hold Indian passport. India has hosted the Tibetan governments in exile in Dharamshala for over 6 decades now. Yet, India does not officially recognize Tibet as independent. It accepts Tibet as part of China. In 1957, India discovered that China had secretly built a strategic highway G219 through Aksai Chin, linking Xizang and Tibet. India claimed Aksai Chin as part of Ladakh, but China refused to withdraw. This was the first real flashpoint. The Dalai Lama's escape to India in 1959 after the Tibetan uprising worsened India and China relations. China accused India of harboring a rebel and questioned India's right to control its border areas. Small skirmishes began in both western and eastern sectors. In October 1962, China launched a full-scale war across both Aksai Chin and Arunachal, the then NEFA. China quickly overran Indian positions but declared a unilateral ceasefire and withdrew from Arunachal while retaining Aksai Chin. Since then, China controls Aksai Chin while India claims it, and India controls Arunachal Pradesh while China claims Arunachal as South Tibet. According to an estimate, about 90,000 to 1 lakh Tibetans live in different parts of India, mostly on border with China. India as Tibetan government is run from exile in Himachal Pradesh. Their children can get Indian passport if born after 1987. However, there is no provision of dual citizenship for Tibetan. Many Tibetan refugees serve in Special Frontier Force raised in 1962, an elite commando force under India's RAW. SFF soldiers fought bravely in the 1971 war against Pakistan and in 2020 Galwan Chushul clashes with China. Post Galwan Valley incident, India and China signed a border patrol agreement in Xizang in October 2024. In the wake of a disputed border, it is also important to look at treaties and agreements between both the countries. In 1988, Rajiv Gandhi visited Beijing. There was no formal treaty signed, but a political breakthrough occurred after decades of frozen ties since 1962 war. Rajiv Gandhi met Chinese President Deng Xiaoping, Premier Li Peng, and General Secretary Zhao Jiang. The visit led to setting up of a joint working group on the boundary question, while India reiterated its position that Tibet is an autonomous region of China. Another major border agreement was signed between India and China in 1993 when Indian Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao met Premier Li Peng and President Jiang Zemin. The agreement on the maintenance of peace and tranquility along the LAC. This was the first major border agreement where both sides agreed to respect the LAC until the boundary is resolved. Both sides agreed to avoid use of force and limit military activities near line of actual control. India's President Shankar Dayal Sharma, during a state visit to China, signed agreement on 29 November 1996 with his Chinese counterpart, President Jiang Zemin. The agreement focused on CBMs in the military field along the LAC. This put restriction on major military exercises near the LAC. Advance notification of exercise supposed to be given. Limits on use of combat aircraft and firing within 20 km of the LAC was also signed. In June 2003, when the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited Beijing in June 2003, India and China signed several agreements, and one of the most significant was on Tibet and Sikkim. For the first time in writing, India explicitly stated that the Tibet Autonomous Region is part of the territory of the People's Republic of China. This went beyond Nehru's 1954 language, which only called Tibet as a region of China without explicitly endorsing China's sovereignty in such clear terms. Prime Minister Vajpayee's statement with Premier Wen Jiabao removed any lingering ambiguity in India's position. At the same time, in return, China also acknowledged Sikkim as part of India. By 2005, China officially confirmed in bilateral talks that Sikkim was part of India. That was quid pro quo. In 2005, agreement signed between Natwar Singh, the then Indian External Affairs Minister, and Chinese FM Li Zhongjing on the political parameters and guiding principles for the settlement of the India-China boundary question was signed during Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao's visit to India. Any boundary settlement should safeguard settled populations, which was a subtle recognition of Arunachal Pradesh status. Mutual and equal security was seen as a step forward, but progress later stalled. In 2012, the then External Affairs Minister S.M. Krishna and Yang Jichi signed Working Mechanism for Consultation and Coordination, WMCC, created to handle border affairs. The WMCC is composed of diplomatic and military officials. It is not meant to discuss boundary settlement, but to ensure peace and resolve face-offs quickly. In 2013, during PM Manmohan Singh's visit to Beijing, both countries signed Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, BDCA, which ensured no tailing patrols to avoid standoffs, flag meetings and hotlines, cooperation in case of natural disasters between the two. After Doklam standoff in 2017, India-China tried to reset ties through the Wuhan Summit in 2018 and the Chennai Summit in 2019. After long pending standoffs due to Galwan Valley clash, both countries signed border patrol agreements in Kazan in October last year, when Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping met on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit in Kazan. So both countries are on a normalization path with renewed Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, people-to-people contact, flights connectivity, and resumption of border trade, then why India test fired its strategic nuclear capable Agni 5 missile? That's a question. It could be because the very next day after talks with India, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang visited Pakistan, India's staunch enemy. While India does not look for any conflict or confrontation with China and want to reciprocate cozying up with China, as both countries agree that the disagreement should not become dispute and competition should not become confrontation. The test firing of Agni 5 missile is a strategic signal to both Pakistan and China against any misadventure by Pakistan. During Wang Yi's Pakistan visit, both countries announced new China-Pakistan economic corridor projects with renewed focus on CPEC, which impinges on India's sovereignty. India sends a strategic signal as Agni 5 missile is capable of hitting targets as long as whole of Pakistan and even China's north side. India's stand on Tibet is no different than the United States, who also considers Tibet as part of China, but China alleges United States of bullying on its human rights record in Tibet and also in Xizang. That's a different autonomous region. Similarly, United Nations General Assembly till now has passed 3 resolutions on Tibet. UNJ Resolution 1353 in 1959, passed on 21st October during the 834th plenary meeting. Resolution 1353-1 expressed grave concerns about the violation of the Tibetan people's fundamental human rights and freedoms and cited official statement made by the 14th Dalai Lama. UNGA Resolution 1723 passed on 20th December 1961 during the 1085th plenary meeting. Resolution 17232 solemnly called for the cessation of violation of Tibetan people's rights, including rights to self-determination. United Nations General Assembly Resolution 2079 passed on 18 December 1965 during the 1403 plenary meeting. Resolution 20793 declared the United Nations conviction that the violation of the Tibetan people's freedom and the suppression of their cultural and religious life increase international tensions and embitter relations among peoples. Even though Dalai Lama has given up Tibet's freedom cause, Indian government stated categorically that no political activities run from the soil of India. Yet, Chinese Communist Party is apprehensive and very sensitive to Tibet issue. President Xi Jinping has announced massive infrastructure project including $167 billion Medong hydropower station, which is also referred to as the Yarlung Jangbo hydro power project on Brahmaputra. Another project announced by Xi Jinping is Sichuan Tibet Railway or Chengdu Lhasa that span approximately 1629 km is estimated to cost around $50 billion US. Xi Jinping's push in having a greater integration with the mainland. It has developed civilian and military infrastructure along the LAC with high quality roads that are dual purpose, where even fighter aircraft can land or take off. India too, in recent years under Modi government, had pursued a great push on infrastructure where BRO, the Border Road Organization, has taken the lead. Galwan was fallout of such infra development. India's Darbuk Shok Daulat Beg Oldie Road, which is about 255 km, connects Leh to Daulat Beg Oldie, the northernmost military post near the Karakoram Pass, and I fortunately happened to be there. The road completed by the BRO around 2019 gave India all-weather access to a region earlier dependent on fragile tracks. BRO also built a bridge across the Galwan River to connect the DSDBO road to a forward position. China viewed these projects as a direct challenge to its position in Aksai Chin because the Darbuk Shok DBO road improves India's ability to mobilize troops and supplies quickly along the line of actual control. It feels that it can cut Aksai Chin. Yet, people living in those border areas suggest that Indian road infrastructure is way deep inside Indian territory. Perhaps India does not want any confrontation with its northern neighbor, who is building very near to the border, who does not recognize most of the 3,488 kilometer long boundary with India. Once again, eyes are set on both the leaders in the wake of Trump's unjustified tariffs on India. It is to be seen if progress on border talks is satisfactory, leading to de-escalation and further agreements to settle long-pending India-China boundary dispute, maybe complete border in Ladakh area or at least in some part of the boundary. National Defense believes in our Prime Minister's philosophy of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. At the same time, developing military capabilities to deter any form of aggression against India that always stands for peace. Thanks for watching National Defense. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.